I've said this before, but it is strikingly how unlike my class you are in the way in which as soon as I appear here, you go quiet. I'm Peter Holland, I'm the Associate Dean for the Arts, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Roche today. Little did I think when I began the first of Saturday Scholars this year that we'd be 10-0 and looking forward to this afternoon in a totally different way. But I did know that many people would want to come to listen to Mark Roche. From my perspective, particularly this morning, Mark as Dean, which is something I'll come back to in a moment, achieved two remarkable things. One was inviting me to apply to come to Notre Dame. This is the purely personal version of the response. But the other is that Mark Roche is the person who invented Saturday Scholars. And he felt very strongly, and oh, so rightly, that it was important that on football home games, we represented something of what Notre Dame does the rest of the time. And it's not only about, of course, the fact that this is an opportunity for some of our most exciting and brilliant faculty to talk about their own research. It's also about representing what our most brilliant and exciting faculty do in their classrooms. Because the effect of listening to people communicating so well about their research here at Saturday Scholars is to realize why Notre Dame places an equal premium on people who are great researchers, who are also great teachers. And this is something of which Notre Dame is rightly proud, that we value teaching and research equally. But Mark achieved many things as dean. I wouldn't want to just limit it to those two. And he was dean for 11 years, from 1997 to 2008. He found time, even amongst that, to carry on writing. He's the author of no fewer than 7 books. Indeed, he just said to me before we started today that he has another book that is currently with a German publisher on what German universities can learn and shouldn't learn from the American system. But he's also written about the big questions. Why choose the liberal arts? Why literature matters in the 21st century? He's written a short book on the intellectual appeal of Catholicism and the idea of a Catholic university, and innumerable articles. At the moment, he's researching what I believe to be one of the most important questions of all, what on earth humor is all about. And his title today is What's So Funny About a Joke? As I learned long ago, there are 2 crucial rules in comedy. The first is always to leave your audience wanting more. And let me introduce Mark Roche.
Thanks, Peter. That was great. As Peter mentioned, I've been working on a book this semester on the future of the German university, another book on the aesthetics of the ugly, neither of which have anything to do with jokes, so I'm not sure I'm fully prepared to give this talk today on jokes. And my unpreparedness reminds me of the story of a priest who was busy completing his homily late one Saturday evening when he receives an unexpected visit from a friend. They talk into the early hours of the morning, and as the friend leaves, he wishes the priest well on completing his sermon. I'm much too tired to continue, says the priest. The Holy Spirit will guide me, I'm sure. The next day, after Mass, the priest turns to his friend and asks, well, how was I? You were quite good, says the friend, but the Holy Spirit was a bit weak. I pray the Holy Spirit will be good this afternoon. What makes me not only unprepared, but also unqualified to speak about jokes is that I'm a German professor. The story when I was a student in Germany was the best exam topic would be German comedy, because we'd only have to prepare 3 works, 2 of which are actually Austrian. So my talking about jokes is also a bit surprising. In fact, this morning at breakfast, I said to my wife, in your wildest dreams, did you ever imagine that I, as a German professor, would be giving a talk on jokes? She looked up from her coffee, smiled, and said, Mark, you're not even in my wildest dreams. Today I want to ask, why do we tell and enjoy jokes? And how are the most complex jokes structured? The most famous essay ever written on jokes is by Sigmund Freud, Jokes and their Relation to the Unconscious from 1905, written in German, of course. I want to begin with Freud, outlining his theory of jokes and commenting on its greatness and its limits. I then explore the ways in which jokes play with various kinds of paradoxes. One can analyze jokes by way of their relation not only to the unconscious, but also to reason. Jokes and their relation to reason, so to speak. Freud's thesis runs something like this. Jokes function like dreams. Both have manifest and latent meanings. We can describe what happens in a dream, but in order to understand its hidden meaning, we need to dig deeper. Similarly, jokes have a superficial and a deeper meaning. The reasons for the latent meaning is that both dreams and jokes overcome or circumvent the inhibitions of an internal censor. Both explore unconscious desires, urges, and thoughts that otherwise would not make the light of day. For example, sexual jokes reveal what we are otherwise not allowed to say, what in other contexts we would repress. Freud also notes differences between dreams and jokes. A dream's hidden meaning is often too difficult to decipher. The indirect meaning may transcend our ability to comprehend it. A good joke is always understandable to those in the know. And whereas a dream is for the most part uninteresting to others, jokes are by definition social. For Freud, jokes cover two basic topics, sex and aggression, whereby aggression is to be understood widely and includes not only political criticism, but also aggression against persons, institutions, moral values, worldviews, religion, and even one's own fears, such as the fear of death. Sexual jokes allow us to engage in innuendo that would otherwise break decorum and make us feel ashamed, and aggression allows us to criticize in a way that might otherwise be impolitic. Jokes give us a license to be more truthful and more open, to break through the censor. Let me give you a few examples of political jokes that fit this model. Pravda was the official party newspaper in the Soviet Union. In Russian, Pravda means truth. And the story goes that the newspaper always printed the truth, though in its own way. In the heroic age, populations did not always battle each other. In some cases, leaders would engage in one-on-one battle with the victor taking all the spoils. A remnant of this idea arose when Kennedy and Khrushchev battled each other in a 100-yard dash to determine which superpower was superior. Not surprisingly, Kennedy won. The next day, Pravda told the following truth. In a race of world leaders, Comrade Nikita Khrushchev, after a tremendous effort, earned second place, whereas the American President Kennedy had to content himself with next to last. Often, political jokes integrate sex. German Chancellor Helmut Kohl was on his way to New York. His advisors told him to be extremely cautious with the clever American journalists. At JFK, a horde of journalists approaches him. One yells out, "Chancellor Kohl, while you're in New York, will you be visiting any striptease bars?" Kohl reflects for a moment and with some level of self-satisfaction, thinking he won't fall into the trap, responds, "Does New York even have striptease bars?" The next day, the headline reads, "Kohl's first question in America, does New York have striptease bars?" Shortly before the Berlin Wall came down, East Germany's final leader, Egon Krenz, visits a state agricultural commune called Happy Future. A photo is taken for the party newspaper, New Germany. In the evening, the journalists sit together and try to come up with appropriate captions. One of them suggests, "Egon Krenz among pigs." The editor says, "Are you crazy? We can't print that." They go to the department head, who studies the photo a while and suggests, "Egon Krenz surrounded by pigs." No, that's not quite right either, they say, and so they go to the editor-in-chief for a suggestion. After much back and forth, they settle on Egon Kranz, fourth from the left. Even the Nazi era had its jokes. In 1933, a Jew walks into the German town hall and requests a name change. The clerk, normally we don't allow name changes, but presumably you have a very good reason. What's your name? Adolf Stinkfuß. Stinkfuß in German means smelly foot. I understand. What would you like to be called? Moritz Stinkfuß. In repressive societies, scarcity is often a topic of jokes. An East German walks into what he thought was a carpet store. Don't you have any carpets here? He asks. No, in this shop we don't have any shoes. Go up one flight, there you'll find no carpets. Before Castro took over in Cuba, there was a sign at the zoo, please don't feed the animals. After the revolution in 1959, the sign was changed. Please do not take the animals' food. After the subsidies from Russia dried up in 1991, the sign read, please do not eat the animals. Not only politics, but also sexuality is a realm where jokes allow us to push the envelope. To what am I referring? Bush has a short one, Schwarzenegger a long one. Married couples share one. A bachelor keeps his to himself, Madonna doesn't have one, and the Pope never uses his. What is it? A last name, of course. Jokes release us from inhibitions by offering innuendo, but restore inhibitions via the double meaning. Some aggressive jokes address stereotypes. A guy walks into the store and says to the clerk, I'd like some Polish sausage. The clerk looks at him and says, are you Polish? The guy says, yes, I am. But if I'd asked for Italian sausage, would you be asking me if I'm Italian? Or if I'd asked for German sausage, would you be asking if I'm German? And if I'd asked for a taco, would you be asking me if I'm Mexican? The clerk says, well, no. The guy says, well, why do you ask me if I'm Polish just because I asked for Polish sausage? The clerk says, because this is a hardware store. Some aggressive jokes cut both ways. A new faculty member joins the history department at Harvard, and his wife is invited to the faculty club by an older faculty spouse. Where are you from? The elderly woman asks. We're from Iowa. Oh, my dear, in Boston we pronounce that Ohio. Religious jokes allow doubts to come forward. A rabbi and a bishop are dining at the governor's mansion. The bishop turns to the rabbi. When will you finally become tolerant and eat some tasty pork roast? At your wedding, Your Eminence. At times, sex and religion come together. Moses comes down from the mountain in order to deliver God's message to the waiting faithful. Okay, everyone, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I bargained him down to 10. The bad news, adultery is still one of them. Frequently, jokes address more than one topic. Gary met Bill in the clubhouse one day and said, I understand you experienced a great tragedy last week. Bill sipped his drink and nodded, his eyes going dark with the memory. I was playing a twosome with Larry, and the poor fellow dropped dead on the 9th hole. I understand you carried him back to the clubhouse. That must have been difficult. He weighed almost 200 pounds. Oh, it wasn't the carrying that was hard. It was putting him down at every stroke and then picking him up again. The joke is not only a reductio ad absurdum of our obsession with hobbies, but it also deflates death by making it seem somehow unrealistic. And then there are, of course, jokes that integrate politics and religion. Two men are walking along the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. They see someone coming out of the woods. Catholic or Protestant, they yell out. Atheist, he says. Fine, Catholic or Protestant. Not all jokes are playful, some are bitter, even brutal. Jokes can be a way of coping with the absurd. During World War II, a Jew fleeing from Nazi Germany arrives in New York. He visits the apartment of his uncle and is astonished to see a painting of Hitler on the wall. "Are you crazy? How can you? Why?" The uncle responds, "Against homesickness." Jokes allow dislikes to emerge wittily. Two businessmen earn a fortune through unscrupulous means. When they open an ostentatious new office, they hire a painter to paint portraits of each of them, which are placed on the wall beside each other. When the new building is dedicated, they invite an art critic to the opening. The art critic looks at the pictures for a while, shakes his head as if something is missing, points to the space between the two, and asks, "And where is the Messiah?" The subtle joke plays on the idea that Christ was crucified between two criminals. Freud's analysis of jokes is brilliant. As in other realms, he rightly recognizes that much in our waking and sleeping lives is driven by hidden meaning. Jokes are often very much about the double entendres that allow us to break barriers. Yet Freud's theory has its weaknesses. First, not all jokes have an internal censor to overcome, as is evident in many childhood jokes. For example, what do Alexander the Great and Winnie the Pooh have in common? They have the same middle name. Second, Freud speaks of aggression, which is partly correct, but jokes of aggression are often deeply ambiguous. Many don't just challenge authority, they help us cope with life. Often they represent rebellion and resignation at one and the same time. It is this additional dimension that makes them so complex. Third, Freud suggests that jokes free the unconscious and unburden us of the compulsions of rationality. But by offering critiques of injustice and by helping us cope with our inner selves, including our fears, jokes serve a very rational purpose. And as Freud himself recognized, their format is often cleverly rational, playing on paradoxes, dialectical structures, and similar complex rational structures. Although jokes overcome some rational restrictions, they also embody and open up other aspects of reason. Fourth, Freud approaches jokes in a value-neutral way. He has no concepts that jokes are subject to normative reflection. Some jokes are not funny, or to be more precise, if we laugh at them, our laughter is not intelligent. Freud includes many discriminatory jokes, especially about women and East European Jews, without recognizing the problem. Related, he has no criteria for what makes a joke great. I myself would elevate 4 elements: the cleverness of the joke's structure, the depth and validity of what it reveals, the appropriateness to the context in which it is told, how one integrates a joke into conversation, and fourth, the effectiveness of the telling. Fifth, Freud does not reflect at any length on the difference between the universal aspect of jokes and the culturally specific aspect of jokes. At times, jokes are bound to a certain context, be it cultural, social, political, or linguistic. In my German classes, I sometimes teach jokes that thematize specific aspects of German society, or that draw so closely on the German language that few Americans would get them. The relation of the universal and the culturally specific is neglected in his study. Sixth, Freud's focus is entirely on the production context of jokes and their inner structure. Beyond noting that jokes are social, he ignores the important question of reception, which seems essential to a joke's success. We take pleasure in deciphering a joke, exhibiting to ourselves as well as others that we are intelligent enough to get it and enjoy it. Seventh, Freud divides jokes into those on the one hand that are characterized by their intrinsic value and those on the other hand that serve instrumental purposes. But many jokes have both intrinsic and instrumental value. Even aggressive jokes can be enjoyed not only for their aggression, but also for their pure playfulness and cleverness. And jokes that serve no deeper purpose beyond their intrinsic value may paradoxically, precisely because they have no external ends, serve a hidden purpose. In an age when almost everything is reduced to instrumental and technical rationality, as opposed to intrinsic value, such jokes, like an artwork that's enjoyed for its own sake, provide release from the prevailing instrumental tendencies of the age. Finally, Freud discusses various types of jokes, some of which are quite interesting and meaningful, such as jokes characterized by double entendres, or by category mistakes, or by meaning in apparent meaninglessness. But his typology has no systematic order. He simply collects a bit of this and that and offers categories without any overarching organic connection. Today, in the short time I have for the second part of my talk, I want to suggest that some jokes can be related to reason and that such jokes follow clear patterns. In my attempt to supplement Freud, I want to focus first on contradictions. Recognizing contradictions is essential in the search for truth. Truth often emerges as the result of refuting competing positions, that is, by pointing to the contradictions inherent in imposing positions. Let me begin by introducing the concept of a semantic contradiction. A semantic contradiction functions on the propositional level, deriving from the two parts of a single statement. Such contradictions function according to the pattern A and non-A. It is raining and it is not raining. They may be simple or slightly more complex, as in Oscar Wilde's quip, "I can resist everything except temptation." Semantic contradictions are normally the least comic forms of contradictions, though the comic does sometimes surface, as in Wilde's quip, or when the hero of Schnitzler's comedy Anatole promises eternal love while simultaneously discussing the conditions of a possible breakup. Also fitting the mode of a semantic contradiction would be a dichotomy between consciousness and self-consciousness. So, for example, the man who slams his fist down on the table and asserts, "There are two things I can't stand, national prejudice and Germans." Semantic contradictions are rarely complex, but they can be. An old Jewish joke will serve as an example. A rabbi is requested to settle a dispute between two merchants. The first merchant explains his case in great detail. The rabbi strokes his beard and says, "You are right." The second merchant gives his version of the events, a diametrically opposed story. The rabbi turns to him, again strokes his beard, and says, "You are right." The rabbi's wife, sitting in the back of the room, intervenes with a question. You've now just heard two diametrically opposed versions of the same story. Is it not impossible that both of them are right? The rabbi turns to her and says, "You're also right." A semantic contradiction can also be subtle, such as Peter's joke, or the suggestion that there are three kinds of people, those who can count and those who can't. The second form of contradiction I want to address are pragmatic contradictions. Whereas semantics focuses on the meaning of an utterance, pragmatics addresses the context in which an utterance is made. Pragmatic contradictions are contradictions between what is said and what is presupposed in the act of saying what is said. Consider the proposition, "There is no truth." The statement denies truth, even as the act of making the statement presupposes truth. The contradiction lies between the statement made and what is presupposed in the act of making the statement. We cannot, without refuting ourselves, assert as true the claim that nothing is true. Consider also the pragmatic contradiction in the statement, "I am modest." Modesty is the virtue of not drawing attention to your own virtues. As soon as I say I'm modest, I'm no longer modest. I'm allowed to say that I'm modest only when I don't say it. To say that I'm modest is to embroil myself in a pragmatic contradiction. Pragmatic contradictions are essential in the search for truth, for a necessary condition of truth is coherence. Consider the contradiction of the character who argues or advocates in debate with others the primacy of egoism over fairness. and power over justice, as does Thrasymachus in Plato's Republic, or the character who argues for the primacy of hedonistic pleasure over rational thought, as does Protarchus in Plato's Philebus. Plato skillfully depicts these characters as comic impostors, contradicting their ideas by the way they deliver them. Another interesting parallel between jokes and the search for truth, beyond the common focus on contradictions, is that both presuppose a certain breaking of taboos. Socrates presents himself in the Apology and the Agorgias as an agroikos, a man from the Hicks, a country bumpkin, without any urbanity. Part of vanity is not asking certain questions, which can expose one's ignorance. In polite society, one doesn't raise the kinds of questions that Socrates asks. Socrates is shameless in that sense, and he praises Callicles in the Gorgias for also dropping his mask, which makes debating truths easier. Socrates asks blunt questions and comes across as impolitic and impolite, but he doesn't care. His interest is truth, the deeper meaning. The Socratic strategy is to entertain an alternative position, show its inner contradictions, and thereby refute it. In the often comic Socratic dialogues, we see then a link between comedy and truth, including a lack of pretensions and internal censors, and a focus on contradictions and their unraveling, which uncovers hidden depths. Many truths are reached via self-cancellation or a double negation, including, as we've seen, the self-refuting structure of the claim, there is no truth. The following riddle underscores the importance of double negation for the recognition of truth. A figure tired of the deception and corruption of society decides to abandon the city and venture to one of two legendary and neighboring villages. In one village, everyone tells the truth. In the other, only liars live. The traveler meets someone just before the road splits into two smaller paths, one of which leads to the village of truth-tellers, the other to the village of liars. The traveler doesn't know from which village the other person has come and is allowed only one question with which to ascertain the path to truth as opposed to falsehood. What question does the traveler ask? Since truth derives from a double negation, whether the other person is a liar or a truth-teller, the traveler will get the correct answer if he or she asks, if I had asked you the way to the village of truth-tellers 20 minutes ago, in which direction would you have pointed? The truth-teller will be consistent, and the liar will negate his previous lie. They will both point to the truth. Pragmatic contradictions are generally more comic than semantic contradictions, and in any case, more multiple in their variations. An Irish sailor takes a trip to South America and sends a telegram back to his wife. Ship sunk, everyone drowned, have a nice life, your husband Mick. The physicist Niels Bohr is seen with a rabbit's foot and is asked, don't believe in rabbit's feet, do you? He responds, no, of course not. I'm a scientist. But the great thing about rabbit's feet is, even if you don't believe in them, they work. Consider also the story of the visitor who comes to a house and asks to speak to the master. The master answers, I'm not home. The visitor states that he doesn't believe him. The master shouts back, this is outrageous. You'd believe my servant if he said this, but not me. Or the joke about the sadist and the masochist. The masochist says, beat me, and the sadist says, no. On a more philosophical level is the following contradiction, also unwittingly humorous. A postmodernist tries to convince others that the purpose of discourse is not consensual agreement, but antagonistic discord. Also built on a pragmatic contradiction is the following political joke. An East German finds that his phone line has been severed. He complains to the officials and asks for the reasons. You slandered the Stasi. In what way? Asked the East German. You repeatedly said on the telephone that the Stasi had tapped your phone. It is fitting that many jokes play with pragmatics, since pragmatics is essential to any good joke. When one tells a joke, to whom one tells it, and how one tells it. A new prisoner was puzzled when his fellow inmates laughed whenever one of them called out a number. He was told that the numbers were a code for specific jokes, which, being well known, didn't need to be repeated in full. Intrigued, the prisoner called out 38, only to be met with total silence. Later, his cellmate explained to him that everything depends on how the joke is told. Some pragmatic contradictions are not immediately comic, but they do have an implicit comic dimension that could be developed. For example, language necessarily fails, or the only true sentences are those of the natural sciences. To communicate effectively that language fails presupposes that language works. If the only true sentences are those of the natural sciences, then the sentence, the only true sentences are those of the natural sciences, is not true. The statement cancels itself. Likewise, pragmatically contradictory are the following dogmas. One should never generalize. One should never make evaluative judgments. The means by which a dictum is presented can comically undermine the message when a contradiction between content and mode of presentation is evident. Obviously contradictory in this way are the following stylistic guidelines. Understatement is always the best stylistic device. Don't be redundant. Don't use more words than are necessary or required. Doing so is utterly superfluous. Eliminate quotations. As Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, I despise quotations. Tell me what you know. Pragmatic contradictions can involve not only speech, but also action. Consider the drunk who resolves to pass by the pub without entering, and after passing it, announces his intention to go in to reward himself for having passed it. I want to introduce now a third kind of contradiction, ontological contradictions. These are contradictions between what is said and the state of affairs to which the statement would refer when the statement is unrealizable. Consider the person who says that he wishes to know where he's going to die. Why would you want to know that? Well, I'd never go there. The contradiction is not semantic, but nor is a contradiction between statement and what is presupposed in the act of speaking. The contradiction lies between the statement and the world to which it would refer. The hero's intentions are unrealizable. Mortality cannot be avoided. A further example, this time from Yogi Berra: if you don't go to somebody's funeral, they won't come to yours. Ontological contradictions arise between statement and reality, whereby the ontological context renders the statement unrealizable or incoherent. Carl Sandburg's quip about a man being so tall that he must climb a ladder to shave himself fulfills the conditions of an ontological joke. It cannot correspond to any real situation. The trial lawyer's question to a doctor is an example of an ontological contradiction. Now, doctor, isn't it true that when a person dies in his sleep, he doesn't know about it until the next morning? A thought process that corresponds to no sensible reality is at the core of such contradictions. Consider the young American on his first trip to Europe who's surprised how small the bones are of a king who ruled for over 4 decades. After reflecting on the issue for some time, he remarks to his friend, they must be the bones from when he was a child. Slippage of temporal coordinates is frequently at the core of such ontological contradictions. Consider the Irishman who, reflecting on leap year, suggests that the extra day be added on in June rather than February, when the weather is much warmer. His friend, struck by the idea, suggests moving the whole month of February to the summer. Impossibility can come in many varieties, even if it is often about death. But why do you want an autopsy made on your body when you die? The lawyer asks Fitzpatrick as he's preparing his will. So that I'll know what killed me, of course. This is an example of the so-called Irish bull, a seemingly reasonable idea that is at its core absurd. Also illustrating the Irish bull and evoking the impossible is the following. Mary, wrote McCafferty, this is the third time I've written to you asking you to be my wife. If you won't do it, then return this letter unopened. Such contradictions are sometimes employed as a device to dupe others. Sometimes the speaker is oblivious to the contradiction. Antinomies often fulfill the impossibility or unrealizability of ontological contradictions. For example, the command, don't obey me. It is impossible to fulfill this command without contradicting it. Besides the three kinds of contradictions I've introduced, semantic, pragmatic, and ontological, I want to introduce two more comic structures, which I call pragmatic tensions and pragmatic symmetries. A pragmatic tension is an inappropriate relationship between statement and world, between semantic and pragmatic levels. Pragmatic tensions are looser forms of incongruities than those defined above. We don't see a direct contradiction, nor is the statement incoherent or unrealizable. Nonetheless, semantic and pragmatic levels are at odds with one another. These tensions rely on ambiguities and slippage, substituting in many cases a wrong but comic meaning removed from reality or appropriateness. The elderly Mrs. Jones sidled up to a guest at her daughter's social gathering after she heard him referred to as doctor. Doctor, may I ask a question? Certainly, he said. Lately, the woman said, I've been having a funny pain right here under the heart. The guest interrupted uncomfortably and said, I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Jones, but the truth is I'm a doctor of philosophy. Oh, Mrs. Jones said, I'm sorry. She turned away, and then, overcome with curiosity, she turned back. Just one more question, doctor. Tell me, what kind of disease is philosophy? The underlying strength of the joke is, of course, its hint that she may have at least an ounce of truth in her question. The well-known Oedipus joke also relies on ignorance, but is less multivalent. Bella was terribly upset. Her fiancé, Marvin, had been to a clinical psychologist, and the results had been not entirely consoling. She said to her mother, I'm not sure the marriage would be happy, Ma. The psychologist says Marvin tests out to have a pronounced Oedipus complex. Her mother shrugged and said, listen, don't listen to that fancy talk. I've watched Marvin, and I tell you he's all right. Look how he loves his mother. A pragmatic tension surfaces whenever I answer in a way that is inappropriate to the situation, when realistic expectations are thwarted. Consider the joke about the zoology student who has written a term paper on worms, and at his oral exam, he gets a question about elephants. The student responds, the elephant is an interesting animal. Unique about the elephant is the trunk, which recalls the worm. There are 5 kinds of worms. Another such example is the following. Oh, poor Mrs. Jones, mourned Mrs. Smith. Did you hear what happened to him? He tripped at the top of the stairs, fell down the whole flight, banged his head, and died. Died, said Mrs. Robinson, shocked. Died, repeated Mrs. Smith with emphasis. Broke his glasses, too. Such an example reinforces Henri Bergson's famous claim that we laugh at rigid or autonomous behavior and that our laughter reinforces our values by exposing deviations from them. Passion for something, whether a hobby or profession, can make one oblivious to what is commonly understood, as with the golf joke above, which illustrates a pragmatic tension. Also, stupidity can be revealed in pragmatic tensions. Erich Honecker, the party chairman of East Germany, held a speech on the development of socialism. Dear comrades, he announces with confidence, the development of socialism cannot be stopped. Today, socialism covers 1/5 of the earth. Soon it will be 1/6, then 1/7, then 1/8, and 1/9. In a speech celebrating the East German nation, Honecker says, 30 years ago, we stood in front of a great abyss. Since then, we have taken a major step forward. What in the US are Polish jokes are in Germany East Frisian jokes. 2 East Frisians are in conversation. Look, I have some money in my fist. If you can guess how much it is, the €2 are yours. Oh, why should I rack my brain over a measly €2? A young man on vacation calls home and speaks to his brother. How's Oscar the cat? The cat's dead, died this morning. That's terrible. You know how attached I was to him. Couldn't you have broken the news more gently? How? You could have said that he's on the roof. Then the next time I call, you could have said that you haven't been able to get him down. And gradually like this, you could have broken the news. Okay, I see, sorry. Anyway, how's Mom? She's on the roof. Beyond pragmatic tensions is the idea of a hidden and unexpected symmetry of statement and pragmatic context. I call these pragmatic symmetries. At times, these involve witty repartee. Student, is it true that the Jesuits always answer a question with another question? Jesuit, who told you that? It was a standing challenge to try to persuade the laconic President Coolidge to talk. One female guest at a dinner sidled up to him and said, I've made a wager, Mr. President, that I can make you say 3 words. You lose, said Coolidge. At times, we see unintended symmetries. The teacher, speaking to a dozy student, name 2 pronouns. The student wakes up and utters, who, me? The joke plays not on a pragmatic tension, but on the unintended symmetry of semantics and pragmatics. Doctor, you have to help me. I forget everything. How long have you had this problem? What problem? All of these are examples of unexpected pragmatic symmetries. My final joke, a philosophical one, also fits the structure of a pragmatic symmetry. The philosophical position called critical rationalism demands that verifiable empirical proofs be given for all truth statements. The critical rationalist suspects that his wife may be cheating on him. So when he goes away to a convention, he asks his friend and neighbor to keep watch on her for 3 days. The husband returns to hear his friend's report, and the friend informs him that on the first 2 days, he noticed nothing unusual. He continues, then on the 3rd day, she took a taxi to the far end of town, walked up 2 side streets to a small motel where she met a man in the lobby. Really? What happened next? They went to the desk and registered for a room. I followed them up to the 3rd floor. What happened then? They went into the room together and I looked at them from the keyhole. What did you see? They started kissing each other and embracing. What then? They disrobed and fondled one another. What then? Then they got into bed together. What then? Then they turned the light out. Oh, this wretched uncertainty. There is a symmetry here of idea and reality, but one that is so absurd we cannot help but laugh. Even as we see a symmetry, we also see a tension between expected behavior and the following of a limited but consistent logic oblivious to the larger context. An oft-lamented pragmatic tension is the turgid study of laughter that lacks levity. I hope, by having integrated a few jokes today into my talk, to avoid that one contradiction. I also hope to have drawn your attention to the greatness and limits of Freud's theory and to the hidden harmony between jokes and reason. Thanks very much. Questions, comments? Sharing of good jokes. Yeah. It's a good question. It really, the deeper context of this question, the question was, if you didn't hear it, is there a reason why some people can remember jokes and others can't? I believe in our age, it could be a question about sociological differences today, but the deeper meaning behind it is, I believe we have moved into an age where fewer jokes are told. And I think that has to do with several factors, one of which is that we don't have the same use of our memory that earlier ages had, where culture was much more oral, and this has been exacerbated by technology where you interact via the internet rather than interpersonally. I think most people who tell jokes, by my anecdotal sifting of the evidence, is they come from families that told jokes, so they have models, and they're used to it, and they hear jokes multiple times, and then they formulate them, reformulate them. They have them ready when a context arises. I myself didn't come from such a family, so I had to work at it a little bit. And the biggest fear you have when you tell a joke is not that the context won't be right. Usually you intuitively know this is a good context for a joke. But there's little more embarrassing than starting a joke and then not getting to the punchline, because the definition of a joke is a short little story that ends in a comic punchline. If you screw up the punchline, you're the one who's the butt of the joke. So you have to work at it if it's not innate. And it's a bit odd, because when you tell a joke, you already know it. It's not as funny when you tell it. It's funniest the first time. But I don't know that there are particular strategies. I think it helps if you grow up in a family. And if I've told a joke a few times, and then a conversation has a context where the joke fits, I don't hesitate to tell it. But if I'm telling a joke for the first time, I have a little bit of an inhibition, and I might not try it at all. Yes?
You mentioned that one of Freud's limitations was that he didn't have a filter of sort of making discriminatory jokes and that kind of thing. And I've also heard recently that there's no such thing as, for example, a funny rape joke or a funny Holocaust joke. Do you come down either side on those?
Yeah, I think this criticism of Freud is correct. I cannot think of a funny rape joke. I think would be absolutely appropriate. The Holocaust is more complex. When, for example, someone said to me, there is a great Italian comic film on the Holocaust. It's A Beautiful Life by Benigni. I was shocked. I couldn't imagine. But I went to see it, and it worked. You have to be extremely creative. And there is also the difference between comedy that is about your own ethnic identity and telling a joke about a different ethnic identity. I noticed probably the one joke that got the least response was, in fact, the joke about the person fleeing from Nazi Germany who goes into the apartment and says, how can this be? Now, that's better told by a Holocaust survivor or a Jew than by me, but it is a window onto Jewish culture. And it is an interesting question. There must be a spectrum somewhere along the way where it is unambiguous with some ugly activities that you don't joke about them. But jokes seem to surface actually most frequently in cultures that have certain presuppositions fulfilled, one of which is they live in difficult circumstances. That is, I believe, one reason why the Irish tradition of telling jokes is so rich, or the Jewish tradition of telling jokes is so rich. Now, there are other presuppositions, one of which is the rich oral culture in both of those traditions. And if you look at German jokes, I taught a course once here at Notre Dame on comedy, jokes, and satire in the German-speaking world. And we read Freud, and the students had to present some jokes to the others. It was practice in telling jokes. They couldn't read them. They had to present them without any text. And they were drawn especially to the East German jokes. The East Germans come up with good jokes because they are aggressive toward the government, and they have to fight that. There is even a great preface to an East German joke. It was, in East Germany, a dangerous thing to tell a joke if you told it to the wrong party. And there are many East German jokes about mistakenly telling a joke to the Stasi, and the Stasi has the punchline back. But to combat this, there was sometimes the strategy on the part of East Germans, before they would tell a joke, not being 100% sure about the other, they would preface it by saying, Ich bekämpfe zurzeit folgenden Witz. At the moment, I'm fighting against the following joke. And then they tell the joke. It gives them, it helps them go around the censor. Yes?
I find that in my heritage, there's a difference between a joke, like a knock-knock joke or whatever it may be, versus storytelling, which creates, I don't even call it a joke necessarily, but the story is funny. Do you differentiate between a joke or a storytelling format that makes everyone laugh, which would be defined possibly as a joke?
Yeah. Let me give you an example, and then I'll illustrate it. I have a good knock-knock joke. You begin. Who's there? The reason I told that joke is it's a good overlap between a joke, which I would define as a story with a punchline, a comic punchline. Freud has the view, which is, I think, partly right, that the best jokes are short. They're quick. There is something about the unexpectedness of the punchline that makes a joke successful. Now, jokes that are long jokes tend to draw on an aspect of the structure of jokes, which is you have a certain repetition. You expect certain things, and then with the punchline, the unexpected arises. So a long joke usually has tremendous repetition. There was a little bit of repetition in my final joke, and then the punchline comes at the end. So a joke can be short or long, but it is a story, if you will, a narrative. A narrative can be very brief, can have presuppositions. This is a joke that's perhaps not ideal in the context of on the border of not being appropriate, but since I'm of Irish heritage, I'll tell it. An Irishman walks out of a bar. A bit like Peter's. It's over before you get there. It has a narrative with presuppositions. So a joke is always a story with a punchline. What I said about oral culture has to do with your question, because jokes are part of oral culture, but telling stories is also a part of oral culture, and stories often have funny moments. If it's beyond a certain point, you wouldn't really view it as a joke. It then is simply a story, instead of a story with a punchline. And a riddle is obviously a joke that has a question. Excuse me, a riddle is a statement that has a question, a puzzle, which may or may not be funny. The Oedipus Rex has the riddle. It begins with the riddle of the Sphinx. It's not funny. But the riddle, what do Winnie the Pooh and Alexander the Great have in common, is also a riddle that's a joke. So there is some overlap. And the overlap goes from riddles, jokes, irony, satire. Some jokes use irony, some jokes are satiric, etc. So it's a very complex field, the whole comic sphere. Yeah?
May I tell you my favorite joke?
Sure.
After seeing the Godfather calls his lieutenants together and he says, "Boys, we got a problem." He said, "I caught the accountant stealing $2 million. I had him taken care of this morning. He swims with the fish." He said, "However," he said, "now we don't have an accountant." He said, "Do any of you guys have an idea about what to do?" One of the lieutenants says, and he said, "By the way, the guy has to not talk too much and not hear too many things." The guy says, "I got the best guy in the world, boss." Godfather says, "Who is he?" He said, "He's my accountant." He said, "Well, why is he qualified?" He said, "He's great with numbers. And besides that, he's deaf and dumb." Godfather said, wait a minute. If he's deaf and dumb, how do you communicate with him?" He said, "Well, I know the sign language." About everything. Godfather says, "This is a great idea." He said, "Hire that guy." A month later, Godfather calls all the boys together again with the accountant. Sits across the table from the accountant, puts his gun on the thing, says to the lieutenant, "Tell that guy right now, if he doesn't tell me in 30 seconds what he did with the $5 million, I'm going to have him blow his head off." So the accountant, the lieutenant says, "What did you do with the $5 million you stole from the Godfather?" The accountant looks and says, I don't know what you're talking about. Godfather says, what did he say? He said, he doesn't know what you're talking about. Godfather picks up the gun, puts it on the guy's forehead and says, tell him he's got 10 seconds left to tell me what he did with the $5 million. Yes. You got 10 seconds left to tell the Godfather what he did with the $5 million. Guy starts to sweat and he says, I hid it under the bushes and the rose garden at my cottage at the lake. Godfather says, what did he say? He said to tell you you're a big fat slob.
Very good. Very good. Other questions? Yeah.
Which category would this be? I attended a funeral and an Irish eulogy, and the disclaimer at the beginning was, we Irish value the truth so much that we only use it in emergencies. One of those classifications.
Let me roll that one over. There is, by the way, since jokes are often a twist, there is the Boston College cheer, in the context of football jokes. Go Irish, beat Notre Dame. Any other? Yes.
Jokes help create relationships.
Often jokes. Often jokes. I think you're absolutely right. Jokes are social, as I mentioned, as opposed to dreams, and very important, I think, for any business that might be tense is to give some levity and humor to it, which is why I noticed Peter was kind enough to mention that I was an administrator at Notre Dame. I had chairs under me who were excellent, but they had no sense of humor, and they tended not to last very long because they couldn't get the distance from the position. So jokes give you humor gives you a certain distance. You can look at it with another eye, and someone who likes humor, likes jokes, tends to be more sociable rather than simply a manager who sees what needs to be done. I think it is a loss of the social atmosphere of our age. It's talked about with technology that people interact with persons who are not in their spatial context. It's a loss that we don't have jokes also for the social environment. So I'm inspiring you all to remember one or two of the jokes and to enliven the Notre Dame community today. One last question?
What is President Clinton known for?
I couldn't hear it. I can't hear.
What is President Clinton, former President Clinton, was known for?
Why?
Having sex between two bushes.